Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode number 78 of the Know Your Physio podcast. I'm your host, Andres Prochel, helping you discover your science to optimize your life. And today's guest is David Jacko Jackson. He's a pro breathwork coach trained through the Oxygen Advantage. And before we get into his bio and background, I do want to mention that if you can't already tell, I am sick. It's my first time getting sick in about 2 years since I had the virus. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I was traveling to Argentina for my girlfriend's birthday, 7 hours each way in a ferry and bus around all kinds of people in a new environment. And tomorrow, I'm moving back to Miami from Uruguay. So as you can imagine, I am under a certain level of stress. This episode was, thank goodness, recorded before I got sick. But I do want to mention this because I'm applying a lot of lessons that I learned during this episode with Jacko to ensure that I am getting as much fresh air, oxygen into my body, that I'm achieving a deep parasympathetic state to allow my body to recover, to sleep better, and I'm breathing through my nose as much as possible. I'm even more conscious of this so I can better filter and humidify the air so that I can ensure that I'm making solid progress towards recovery. Believe it or not, your breath can do this and much more. And on today's show, we're going to teach you how to make the most of every single breath you take, no matter where you are, who you are, or what you're doing. David Jacko Jackson is a master instructor with Oxygen Advantage. He's a former professional rugby player, accredited UK SCA strength and conditioning coach, NASM performance enhancement and corrective exercise specialist, on a mission to make breathwork a normal part of our everyday lives. He trained his own breathing after a brain injury in 2013, which forced him to retire from professional rugby. And ever since, he's been passionate about helping others change the way they breathe to improve the way they feel, move, and perform. He believes that in breathwork, there is something for everyone. After having worked with professionals seeking better stress management, or those suffering with anxiety, to professional athletes looking to improve performance and everything in between. He knows that how you breathe impacts all areas of your body and mind, which is why he's so passionate about helping people use breathwork to fulfill their true potential. Having felt the benefits personally, he wants to share it with others. And man, oh man, today's show is chock full of practical advice takeaways that you can literally introduce immediately. I guarantee you that by the time you're done listening to this episode, you'll be breathing much, much better. And as such, you'll be investing in almost every area of your life, because let's face it, the breath is the most accessible way to influence your physiology and your psychology. Within seconds, you can breathe in such a way that makes you more aroused or more stressed. You can also breathe in such a way that helps you relax, achieve peace, calmness, a restorative parasympathetic state, and everything in between, including flow, productivity, etc. So I want to show you guys the influence that breath has, and that's why I wanted to have Jacko on the show to teach us the mechanisms and how to apply them in our day-to-day. So hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Jacko, it's a pleasure to have you here on the show. Thank you for joining us.
A pleasure to be. I don't know if I've been on a top 5% podcast in the world, so I'm fairly excited. I'll have to make sure that I don't talk too fast, because that's what happens when I get excited.
Well, you know what? In that case, and then first of all, thank you for being here. You're an honored guest, and I know that you're going to be on much bigger podcasts in a very near future, especially with the incredible content and the incredible work that you're doing. And you know what? That being said, because I'm sure when you start any podcast and when you have to engage in any kind of performance event like this, I mean, shouldn't we do some breath work first?
Good. It's interesting. The breath can influence I'm sure and we'll talk about and touch on, but can influence our state, it can influence our nervous system. I think it was Brian McKenzie coined the phrase like the breath is a remote control to the nervous system. And so if we want to become more alert and get a little bit more focused and energized and drive a little bit of sympathetic tone, there's some things we can do. And with the Oxygen Advantage, which is the techniques that I teach primarily, is I'd do some breath holding before doing a presentation or a talk or something. But then if you're a little bit nervous, then actually you don't want that, and you want to actually be able to bring yourself down and get yourself calm. And then there's also, that would be more sort of, slowing down and reducing the respiratory rate, maybe extending some exhalations. and then there's that middle ground where you want to keep everything. You feel like you're in a sweet spot and you want to stay nice and balanced. And it was interesting. Before you just nipped off to get a drink of water before we started, and my first inclination was like, oh, I wanted to either grab my phone or check my email. And then I was like, you're going to be 30 seconds a minute. What on earth could I possibly get done in that time? Like, it's just, so I just sat there and I was in a decent space and I was like, let's just stay in that good space, which would be then just keeping the breathing even and keeping it calm, like a classic one that people would know, like a 4x4x4 box
the
breathing,
box breathing.
The Navy SEALs made famous. Yeah, but there's let's do one that's dead simple for people to use. That's can be used in many different scenarios depending on your state. It's we call it many short breath holds. It's not a challenging breath hold at all. It's going to be only literally 2, 3, 4 seconds. Okay, and we do them every 2 breaths. And your idea with your 2 breaths is to use those 2 breaths to get into a nice, calm and connected place with yourself. Think about your breathing, feel the airflow in your nose. And then we have these little pauses, these little gaps will be the end of the exhale, which just give us some stillness and some space, and also just create some gaps in a breathing cycle, particularly if someone was feeling like they needs to calm down a little bit. This is a great one for that. So most of us spend a bit too much time stressed. So we'll get in a nice calm state. What you can look out for, if you're relatively calm now, you may notice a build-up of saliva in the mouth as a bit of a sign of it impacting that rest, digest, relaxation response. So
and it's interesting that it starts, the digestive process starts in the mouth, and even so, if you're more relaxed, you can tell because you start to salivate more. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but when you get if I say I've got a client or a patient that's like chronic, like really struggling, chronically stressed, it can take a while doing these breathing exercises before they'll actually notice any build of saliva in the mouth, even though we're doing some down regulation work, some vagus work. But yeah, depending on someone's current state of stress and arousal and autonomic nervous system sort of regulation, they'll either respond to this really quickly and they'll be dribbling by the end, or they may notice nothing. And if you notice nothing, then it means there's some significant work to do, but significant benefits to get out of doing it. So dead simple.
So let's do some of that right now, if it's cool with you.
Yeah, dead easy.
Can you guide us through it?
Yeah, I'll guide us. We're going to take 2 breaths and then pause, 2 breaths, pause. Basically, I'll take us through like that. Okay. So whilst we do it, if you just make sure that your jaw's relaxed, mouth softly, lips softly together, teeth not touching. Yeah, you can close your eyes if it helps you connect a little bit more internally. Make sure the tongue is to the roof of the mouth and the teeth aren't touching. And there's a nice sense of relaxation to the face. And I want you to think about breathing into the face through the nose rather than breathing up your nose. That will help you with your mechanics. So breathing into the face through the nose, we'll take 2 breaths. So we go breath in softly through the nose, then relax on the exhale, and then take a second breath in through the nose, relax on the exhale, and then we'll pause for 2, 1, then take a gentle breath in for the nose, relax as you breathe out through the nose, even breath in, and a relaxed even breath out. And again, we'll pause for 2, 1, gentle quiet breath in, relax, calm on the way out, gentle breath in for the nose, relax on the way out. And this time we'll pause for 3, 2, 1, gentle breath in, notice the airflow in the nose, relax on the way out, gentle breath in, relax on the way out. And again, we'll pause for 3, 2, 1, gentle breath in, relax on the way out, gentle breath in, relax on the way out. And this time we'll pause for 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll do one more gentle breath in, relax on the way out, gentle breath in, relax on the way out. Last one, pause for 4, 3, 2, 1. Then just let your breathing return to normal. You may feel
very nice.
Yeah, it may be, but depending on where you were before, now you could feel a little bit too like, Jacko, let's just have a game of sleeping lions now. I'm just chilled,
Yeah,
like we'll
now I'm
just
like, oh,
relax and like, yeah. So
very, very relaxed.
yeah, it's great. Yeah, I mean, we use that everything from, if you were really if someone was stressed, like on the verge of having a panic attack, and their breathing rate is getting out of control, asking someone to slow down their breathing rate, slow your breath, calm your breathing down. When you're feeling like you're going to have a panic attack and you're losing control of it, you cannot just cognitively slow your breathing down, or you don't feel like you can. It actually feels more stressful to do that. But
Yeah.
ask someone just to pause, just break that fast cycle with a little pause of just literally 1 or 2 seconds, like we were at the start, and then take a couple of breaths, gives you something to think about, connects you to the present moment with your breathing, and then pause again. And it helps us to actually regain control of that fast breathing rate, because it's the fast breathing rate that um, is the thing, or the breathing rate is the thing that ramps up under most different types of stress. There's not many stress that send the volume, the size of the breath up. It's more the speed of the breath, and then we lose control of the breath, and that ramps up the heart rate, ramps up the stress response. You're going to start having to
And
breathe through
why,
the mouth because it's so fast. All of that then just starts to kick in and just fall in that vicious cycle.
right? And why is there such a strong link between our breath and our nervous system state, our autonomic nervous system state? Like, why does that exist?
Um, Gosh, why does it exist? Let's maybe come onto that. Give me some time to think about that. Why does it exist? Would be potentially interesting.
Let's say from an evolutionary perspective, like, why does it make sense for us to be stressed when we are mouth breathing and breathing more quickly? Like, why does it
So,
create this sort of
yeah,
positive feedback loop that you're describing?
well, so there's some interesting things of like, as soon as you decide you're going to go and start exercising, your respiratory rate and heart rate start to change. Not actually when you start exercising, you start thinking about it. Um, and our heart rate and our breathing rate are directly linked. Every inhale we take, our heart rate speeds up. It's more sympathetic activating of the nervous system. Every exhalation we take, the heart rate slows down slightly. We release a neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, helps with that heart rate slowing down, and is more parasympathetic promoting. So when we talk about HRV, we're looking at that heart rate variability, the time in between those. We want that changing, slightly speeding up, slightly speeding up with every single breath that's being taken. So from an evolutionary perspective, that is a case of our heart rate and our breathing and our nervous system trying to be in this state of like constant flux or constant balance, and basically being able to react and being able to react appropriately. And when I have like that stress response, fight or flight, or freeze, but within the fight or the flight aspect, the chances are there's going to be a physical exertion, and I'm going to need to ramp up heart rate, ramp up total amount of air that I can breathe in, and I'm going to start having to take bigger breaths and faster breaths to facilitate that. And so it's geared into that sort of survival from that perspective. There's some interesting things that I look at it now that there's some things, if you think about it from an exercise perspective, if I'm running and I start panting, like fast mouth panting, and that's my automatic go-to, just because that's automatic doesn't mean it's optimal in terms of oxygen delivery to your tissues. And actually that fast mouth panting is part of that stress response. And when we're exercising, when you're that central governor theory ideas is that sort of fast mouth stress breathing that feels horrible, and you feel gassed out, you don't feel like you can continue anymore, and it doesn't help you recover faster. It's actually your brain's way of getting you into a state where you're going to stop, because it ultimately wants you to stop. So
Wow.
there's some really interesting stuff, isn't there, around like evolutionary, what we were designed for, and then this absolutely crazy world that we now live in that sometimes feels normal and other times feels absolutely bonkers.
I was going to say bunkers too.
Yeah, not always, but sometimes it does feel bonkers. Yeah,
So what you're alluding to is this idea that, we've evolved to run away when we experience stress. Most of the stress that we experienced for the bulk of human evolution was stress that we could run away from because it was either like a natural disaster or a predator,
yeah,
right? And so nowadays we get the same response, but we're not in a scenario where the best decision is to run away. So that means that we have to manage through breath work the very mechanisms that are making us more stressed in order to run away. So breathwork is the intervention for this sort of modern mismatch.
Yeah, well, there's basically our breathing and our nervous system and our stress response are linked. And so if we're going to get more stressed, and let's just open up that word stress to like all types of stress, like, so not just like mental, like physical, emotional, thermal, so been everything. Toxins, like for me, brain injury, like that's what, like, so that our breathing is then going to get affected. And so in order to, your breathing will not normalize itself as in back to good. If you're getting traits of dysfunctional breathing and you're becoming sensitive to carbon dioxide buildup, that is not going to normalize itself back to good levels. It just can't on its own. It's just going to stay at, because the body has ways of adapting. Like the body will adapt. Your chemosensitivity respiratory center will change. Your kidneys will help do some of that balancing of the blood pH. And it's just additional. Then you've got a build of like additional processes and stresses that the body's got to do to keep you at like a state of being okay and being alive. And you know, the body is, you can abuse your body like immensely, and we survive for long periods of time. I think one other thing I wanted to say on the evolutionary stuff, and I haven't talked about this much, but you make a really good point. And there was someone, Caroline, I'm going to forget her name, I have to come back to that, but Caroline, I feel like it was Williams. Anyway, she was a scientist, does a lot of work with National Geographic, and she was speaking at an event that I was speaking at as well, and she was talking about like the hunter gatherers, and when they look at what they did with, we're talking about running away from animals, but also like in terms of hunter gatherers, what did they do? They spent large times just literally walking and roaming, and they didn't chase after the animal, they just walked, and it was just like super low level, like zone 1, possibly some zone 2, but they just had a massive aerobic base of work, and there's stuff around the facial structure, the nasal breathing, for all of that would have been absolutely fine for them, and they would have honed just naturally good breathing as a part of just their everyday life. Whereas, you know, we've got everything from our posture, because we spend too much time sitting, whatever you think about that. And, you know, there's so many things that actually the world, this crazy world that we live in, it's not really geared up for us to breathe well, but it's not geared up for us to be healthy with anything. You have to be very intentional to like break out of the norms if you live in the sort of first world, this day and age, you know, depending on what you do as a job.
Right. And so, right, in our
if you're
case,
a farmer, you know, it's good. You're outside, you're in nature,
right.
You're lifting stuff up, and you're constantly moving. But you're having a hell of a financial struggle in the UK.
Right. So then, what you were just describing earlier is this idea that, well, not idea, the reality that if you're not breathing properly, your body will find a way to adapt, and that creates more of this sort of padding that takes you further and further and further away from proper breathing.
Yeah. So
is there any way to undo that?
For sure. Like I talk about it, and again, it's a link to stress. I talk about it about like efficiency. So, and you know, think about how important breathing is to your brain, to your body. Like it's everything. In the all bets are off if you're not breathing. Yeah. You know, I watched my dad last year take his last breath. And you see that you go like at this point, I'm watching that, knowing the importance of breathing, and you know, having been teaching people, but and then you see, yeah, okay, literally, no, food doesn't matter, obviously, like water, nothing matters once there's no air. So if you're doing it badly, it doesn't matter in terms of, you're not going to instantly die, but because the body's got a number of ways that it can keep air coming in and out by moving the rib cage in different ways, and comes back to that notion I said before of, just because it's this thing that's automatic, it doesn't mean that it's optimal. And actually, when it's less than optimal, it's going to become less efficient. And just as efficiency of anything, if I'm less efficient at breathing, I have to do more of it. And there's two things with my breathing. There's the speed of it, and there's the size of each of those breaths. And if I become inefficient, I'm either going to have to take bigger breaths than I need, or I'm going to have to take more of them than I need each minute, or a bit of a combination of the both. But either way round, it's meaning that my body's having to do more work, like physically more work in terms of getting it going. And then it's going to disrupt my pH sensitivity or pH of my blood. And that's then going to have, the kidneys are going to have to do more work to buffer. And so we've got these processes going on in the background that the body gets on and does and keeps you alive. But you're asking it to do a little bit more work than it needs to just be here on the planet, alive and conscious. And so one of the things that I try and say is, if you think of the breath as a movement pattern, joints move, bones move, muscles are involved in the movement pattern, and it's central to us literally physically where it is. And I happily describe it as the most fundamental movement pattern you're going to have to do. And the sheer volume of them that you do, 20,000 plus per day, every one being like a repetition, you only have to do it a little bit badly for there to be a build-up, but equally you have to just start to tweak it a little bit, and then you can improve the efficiency of them. And it comes from a couple of different dimensions, like the mechanics of how we breathe in terms of ribcage articulation, diaphragmatic breathing. And that can be challenging for people when they've been stuck in sort of upper chest, more vertical breathing. So they just can't access the diaphragm. It takes a bit of time to get that for some people. And then there's links to it, but you can sort of talk about it separately, the biochemistry. So how well your body utilizes oxygen, and then how well it deals with the carbon dioxide building up, which those two things influence each other. And so when you work on those two things together, then you can improve the efficiency of how people breathe. And you can change someone's breathing in literally 1 minute. Now it's not like 1 minute it's done, but if you recheck their sort of automatic breathing patterns, it will be influenced, and gradually they'll go back to their previous norm. But over time, you make real changes with people, and literally, even though it's one of the most basic things you do, because it's always there and always in the background, it's not uncommon for people. It sounds over the top. And the first time someone said it to me when I was just starting out in this, I was a bit like, okay, that's quite dramatic almost, but they say it's life-changing. Yeah. So,
you changed my breathing in less than a minute, and not just now, but you brought me back to a concept that you taught me, just following you on social media, which is this concept of breathing into your face. I thought I had it all figured out,
That's a good one. I can't take credit for that either, to be fair.
That's a really but you can take credit for sharing it with me and for so many other people, and
that got me banned on TikTok.
That got you banned on TikTok?
Jacko was too dangerous for TikTok for 2 weeks. I appealed it, and then they
wait, but why?
Well, I think they were worried that people were going to start shoving things in their face, which is probably a fair point. But it was demonstration purposes to show that like the airway goes back into the face rather than like
when you put the
Q-tip,
swab,
the cotton swab in, yeah.
Oh my goodness! Go figure, right? You're here teaching people how to live better, perform higher, breathe easier, and support their health. And for the sake of just using an analogy, I guess I understand, but at the same time, it's just like, man, you're doing some important work.
It wasn't. So I appealed it, and it's now allowed on. It's there, visible, and it was one of the thing for me is right. When I started looking at breathing because I was recovering from a brain injury I'd had back when ended my professional rugby career 10 years ago, and some of the starting points, okay, you need to be diaphragmatic breathing. I'm like, okay, am I doing it? I don't know. I'm trying to do it. Am I doing it right? How do I know if I'm doing it? So all these just basic questions of like, how are you supposed to breathe? And am I doing it right? And I just couldn't answer that question. So anytime I find something that just seems like dead simple, dead up, not obvious, but simple and rational, and actually you just go, yeah, that makes a direct difference. And literally, when you breathe into the phase, you don't breathe as vertically as much. And there's there's things about like the way you think about something does influence how your body performs the movement. Particularly around particularly one of the other things, a number of things that make it difficult about your breathing when it's become dysfunctional. One, like the shape of the diaphragm and as a muscle is it's just not like any other muscle in terms of its attachments and how it moves. And then it's inside of you, so it's not like you can easily sort of touch it or see it or whatever compared to like your bicep. And then our proprioception of the trunk area, just for mankind, is poor. We don't have good proprioceptive awareness of that area. So when it gets dysfunctional, it's quite hard to really work on that. Whereas
it's
there's
difficult to
just
diagnose.
yeah, and so there's some very simple things like literally just like putting your own hands on your body or having someone working with it to just help you feel where you're breathing. And some of the simplest things are the best. I've got a free course on my Pro Breathwork app that's the foundations that covers literally everything, and pretty much most people don't ever need to anything else, and they'll sort their breathing out by just following that. And I made it free because I wanted it to be available. I didn't want people to be rooting around in the dark trying to find this information out. It feels like it feels like a basic human right to be able to know how to breathe right. So yeah, it's something that I've experienced a lot of that. Well, I don't know if I'm doing it right, and not finding easy solutions, um, and just being able to have little tools and little ways to actually connect to your diaphragm or be able to feel it moving, be able to feel your ribs, and just what's that supposed to be like. And because of the effect it had on me, we were talking off air before we went on about like why would I be so sort of passionate and energetic about this thing. And it's funny because when people say that to me, like to me, I'm not doing that. I'm just, I guess it's just the way it comes across. It just becomes because it comes from a place of, something I desperately, in the end, needed, but had no idea that I needed it for years. I had my brain injury 10 years ago. And probably for 4 years, I was going around with horrendous breathing with no idea about it. And one of the things about breathing at rest, which is where you spend most of your breathing, you sit there, someone will be listening to this now and they'll be like, okay, Jacko's on about breathing. Am I doing it right or not? And they'll try to pay attention to their breathing because they just sat down listening to it, as in listening to the podcast. They'll be like, don't know. You might not barely be able to. You're like, I know I'm breathing, I can feel it a bit, but it's not. Your dysfunction doesn't become loud enough and doesn't become visible enough to see it. Just sat down at rest. When you start moving, when you start exercise, or very interestingly, what I do with people is if you just ask someone, don't do any exercise, just take a big breath, imagining you are exercising, and people go. And you go, okay, well, there we go. Just seen it. You've just shown me what you do when you feel out of breath, even though you're not out of breath. You go mouth, you go vertical, and you go shallow.
Yeah.
And so then it's just learning to break those habits. Yeah.
So I definitely want to get into some ways that people can diagnose themselves to see if really they do need to pay more attention and develop some of that, what we call interoception, right? Really feeling your body, having that awareness for your body. But before we get there, I want to help make the point to folks who may not be familiar why vertical breathing is not ideal. And if I may, and I would love for you to jump in and correct me, like a very simple way that I see it is, well, if you're using your diaphragm, then you innervate or activate the vagus nerve, which puts you in a more parasympathetic state. When you breathe with your upper chest, breathing vertically, you're taking away from that response and putting yourself in a more sympathetic state. If you can maybe help elaborate that idea, make the point for people that it's just not the right way to breathe.
Yeah. Gosh, there's a good English word, isn't it? Gosh. There's there's that, and then I'm trying. My brain's just going like, well, then there's this, and there's this, and there's this. There's loads and loads of stuff, and it's what's all quite nice to know is like they're all the same. They're all the same thing. So remember, I was talking about efficiency before. If you're breathing with the diaphragm, you're pulling air as you breathe into the lower portions of the lungs because it's being activated from that bottom portion. The lower portions of the lungs, because of gravity, you've got the most amount of blood because gravity just works down. And by design, you've got the greatest density of alveoli. That's where the transfer of oxygen goes from your lungs into your blood. So when you breathe with your upper chest, you're not sending the air to the portions of the lungs where it really needs to go to in order to have decent transfer. So then what happens? You still feel slightly out of breath, so then you're going to have to carry on breathing a bit faster with that upper chest breathing. There's one element to it, and then it's almost there's this then cascade of things, and the order of it's a bit chicken and egg, like which comes first. But if we're thinking about that, then as I'm breathing faster, the brain will always go for the path of least resistance. If you're ending up breathing faster, because it's shallower and it's then being inefficient, you have to breathe a bit faster, you're more likely to open your mouth because the mouth provides about 50% less resistance than the nose does. And then because it provides less resistance is then easier, but then there's no resistance to start slowing it down, so you're going to be even a little bit more like that. With the mouth, you get dehydrated. You lose 42% more moisture. It's a very specific number, isn't it? But it's from a study. So 40%, more moisture when you're mouth breathing compared to nasal breathing. That moisture is really important for the oxygen uptake from the lungs into the blood as well. There's all sorts. There's 30 different functions of the nose, one of which is like that connection with the extra resistance that it provides. That connection to actually diaphragmatic breathe. Whereas you're much more likely to upper chest breathe when you're mouth breathing. The nose is a filtration system. Right. Nitric oxide in the nose is like a magic gas in there. Yeah, and
I just did a podcast on nitric oxide.
Oh, nice.
With Nathan Bryan, and he teaches us about the antibacterial benefits. The vasodilates you, so you get more of that blood flow.
Yeah. There's like they've do it like functional MRI scans of people's brain, getting them to nasal breathe and then getting them to mouth breathe and seeing how they get different brainwave activation. There's the olfactory nerve that if you're mouth breathing, you bypass, whereas when you're nasal breathing, you get all these good brainwave patterns going as well. So it's when you start to look at all of you look at functional anatomy, and then you look at all of like the processes that the nose and diaphragmatic breathing link in together. It's super clear, whether you believe in God or not, it's super clear that the body is designed to breathe through the nose with the diaphragm moving down and flattening out and the rib cage, expanding up and out. And there's not really any argument against that. That's everyone's happy to agree with that. And one of the things that I believe is that the body's designed like that. It knows how to do that. We've just got old and a bit affected and stressed, and all sorts of things happen to us that then means that the body just needs a few reminders, maybe take away a few restrictions and some bad habits it's got with its breathing, restore a little bit of chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide, which is we haven't talked about yet, and then let the body get back to how it wants to breathe. When this is an important, or something I believe is important, if someone is trying to work on their breathing. If you take something completely different and abstract, like trying to learn how to do a handstand, you are not designed to walk on your hands. Your shoulder girdle is nothing like your hip. You're not designed to work it. So if you try and learn, you can learn. Loads of people can handstand. I can do a handstand, but it's a quite uphill battle trying to do that because it's not normal. It's not natural. It's not what you're designed to use those body parts for. But you can do it. Whereas when you're trying to train some dysfunctional breathing, and you've been upper chest breathing for a long time, and you're really sensitive to carbon dioxide, and you really can't feel your diaphragm at all, you don't know how to move your ribs, and your rib cage is stuck down, it can feel like you're fighting an uphill battle, and it can feel like you're doing something your body doesn't want to do. But I think it's very important to believe and understand that you aren't trying to get your body to do something it doesn't previously know how to do and also want to do. Because when you start to just unlock that a little bit, I had one of my clients a long time. But one of my first ever clients that I was working with, she was like, I think in my early days, I think I got very, I was like explaining a lot of the science, even to like clients that didn't want to know about the science, just
Yeah.
because I liked the science.
Yeah, I'm
And
guilty of that too.
yeah.
Trust me.
So she was like, Jacko, this isn't going to sound very scientific to you. She goes, but, and she was talking about the mechanics that we'd worked on in the previous session. She was like, when I get it right, it just feels good. And I was like, that's perfect. She
Yeah.
could literally physically feel the difference when she breathes well with her ribcage and her diaphragm.
Yeah.
And it's just and it feels good because the body just almost like goes, oh, this is easy. This is it's a bit easier. Like it's easier for it to do that. It likes it. The body doesn't like working hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our clients and the people that we help are the best teachers.
Yeah.
And
Keep it simple.
yeah, and I'm really just blown away by that. The whole idea of the gravity and having most of these alveoli near the bottom of the lungs. Like, I took advanced systemic physiology classes. I studied physiology in school. I studied altitude training, all of that, and we never learned that. But it makes so much
I
sense.
know. Then it's obvious, isn't
Most of
it?
that blood is pooling towards the bottom. You're going to have more of alveoli, more oxygen exchange occurring there. We never learned that. If I had learned that early on, I think I would have been able to breathe a lot better.
Yeah.
I would have had more of a reason to. I would have understood the science and why there's going to be such a huge return on my investment.
Yeah.
When I was first introduced to proper breathing, I mean, I realized it was early on in my life where, okay, I think it was more early than I guess most people uh, get their hands on this kind of knowledge and awareness, but it was still at a point where I was like, man, like I've been doing it wrong it had been 16 years. My first yoga class, I'll put it that way. My first yoga class where I learned that concept, and instantly I switched from being a vertical, upper chest breather to a diaphragmatic breather. And just that alone, just that alone gave me tremendous benefits, but it felt so awkward when it first started out.
Yeah.
It felt way awkward, but I did feel good. I started to believe in that process and got more and more and more into the breath work. And now it's something that I do automatically. And now something that I'm doing automatically, this is the next evolution, is breathing into my face like you taught me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Huge.
we'll do some assessments, people. Just use that example there of making like instantly. So from that yoga session, it changed things from you. Now,
Yeah, it felt a lot better, but it still felt like it's something that I had to practice and had to learn.
yeah,
I was
and
out of touch with that.
yeah. There's some short term things you can do, almost like hacks to like help with breathing, but then ultimately like changing habits of the mechanics and then changing chemosensitivity to CO2, like they're the long-term things that are going to make real change over your ability
Yeah.
to be able to control your states and control your breathing. But like I remember my first few yoga sessions after finishing playing rugby contact sport, stiff as a board. Now
Yeah.
yoga, and I remember, I probably went for it more than a year, I bet, before I was literally even at the point of going, oh, what? I'm supposed to breathe when you're saying these different movements. Like I was so consumed with trying to get my body into the right
Yeah.
position, my breathing would have been
Yeah.
all over the place. And just I'm using that as an example to go like, because everyone's going to have different experiences of these different things, and we've potentially done the similar type of thing in terms of both done yoga and then had a very different experience. And the point, or one point I highlight from that is, if you're struggling with your breathing but don't quite know about it, because at this point I didn't know about it, because at rest, can't tell. I start exercising, but I'm doing an exercise that like is making me think about the stretch and the position I'm trying to get into. So I'm not then
Right.
even thinking about my breathing, but my breathing's being challenged. And then what does that do? It exposes my dysfunction. I'm so preoccupied
Mm.
with the stretch or the move of the yoga, so I'm not even paying attention to it being dysfunctional. And then it's going to create this vicious cycle. Because there was a study done last year, May 2022. I think it was a European journal it was a strength and conditioning journal. And they screened nearly 2,000 people that were deemed to be of athletic population, so all, people that were exercising, and 91% of them were identified in a high-low test, so in terms of the mechanics of their breathing, to be dysfunctional breathers. 91%.
Wow.
And it's like they're physically active people. Surely they're better at breathing. Whereas, and this is my theory on it, or one potential element to it could potentially be that at rest, they don't know they've got these dysfunctional breathing habits. Then when they start exercising, it just exasperates them more. And if you're not being taught or given any tools to actually improve it, you can get fitter whilst breathing poorly, and you're going to get fitter, but your breathing's still going to get challenged and be poor, and you're going to reach a limit to your fitness and your exercise performance that's going to be limited by your breathing, and you need to do something in your breathing then to unlock where you could actually your true potential, for sure.
So you can improve and you can get by, but you're not going to be able to optimize or get to the elite level unless you consider something like this.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. And can you tell us about carbon dioxide? I learned to appreciate it and building up the tolerance to high levels of CO2 when I started training very seriously for free diving and spearfishing. And you have to do the the CO2 tables in the pool and such, and over time build up that tolerance. And you learn. I mean, people ask me all the time, oh my God, how do you do that? How do you hold your breath so long? Don't you run out of oxygen? Isn't that bad for your brain? And I'm like, it's a lot less to do with oxygen than it is to do with CO2 tolerance. That's really why you got the urge to breathe. And so can you tell us a little more about CO2, what it means, and how we can build up our tolerance?
Yeah. And we can do, because we were going to talk about some assessments, and one of them could be the assessment of CO2 tolerance. And to start, you mentioned there about oxygen. People's oxygen, does it not affect your oxygen to the brain? And obviously, like if you hold your breath for like 7 minutes or whatever, then you're going to really create some problem. But generally speaking, and interestingly, from my own experience of brain injuries and concussion, breath holding is a great tool to actually increase blood flow, cerebral blood flow, oxygen supply to the brain, because carbon dioxide within the blood actually helps dilate it, helps with circulation, and is the catalyst that allows oxygen to be released from the hemoglobin, the red blood cells, to actually get into the tissues. And that is impaired after brain injuries. And so I'm doing a lot of looking at some of the research on this, frighteningly, goes back to the 1960s. Yet 60 years later, we're still not, if someone has a brain injury, they're not getting any assessment of their breathing and then any very simple breathing exercises to actually help them restore blood flow and oxygen supply to the brain. It's absolutely crazy.
Wow.
It's not that it's new science that's come out. Anyway, that's a little...
It's just not widely accessible, and it needs to be. It needs to be widely accessible.
Yeah.
You said earlier, you said something that I loved everything you said so far. It's amazing. But you said that this needs to be a human right. That's why I started this podcast.
Yeah.
Knowing your physiology, aka your breathing, aka your fitness, etc., XYZ, like it is a human right. And I think that above all, the breath is a human right because it's just so accessible to everybody. It's something that everybody can work on, can improve. And it's something that you can do right now while you're listening to this podcast. You don't need to buy the gym equipment. You don't need to invest in a new diet. You don't need to get this supplement. It's just like, just do this right now and you're going to live better, perform higher, and feel so much better as a whole.
Yeah,
so
literally.
I love that you said that, and I want to make sure to mention, but if you can take us back now to the CO2, like how can we improve our tolerance to it? Like how can we train ourselves, whether we're free divers or not? How can we improve our tolerance to it, and what does it actually mean to improve that tolerance?
So you mentioned there, like carbon dioxide is our primary stimulus to breathe. There's the central chemoreceptors are located in the brainstem, in the medulla, in the pons, and they respond to changes in carbon dioxide and blood pH mainly. Because carbon dioxide gets carried as carbonic acid, 65% of it when it's within the blood, it makes the blood more acidic. And so the breath, or the brain, is using the breath to modulate blood pH moment by moment. Your oxygen levels, 75% of the oxygen that you breathe in, you breathe out. It's really your body. You put a pulse oximeter on you. Even when you start going off running and sprinting, your blood oxygen saturations will probably still be within normal level. Like 95% to 99 is normal. Even if you go out sprinting, it'll still probably be 95. It might drop down to 94, 93. But that's still high. It's like you're nearly full. You're nearly full of oxygen, but you're panting like this. And it's because the body wants to get rid of the CO2. You feel like you want to take a big breath in, because what always happens after a big breath in? You take a big breath out, and you're
breath
getting
out.
rid of the CO2. But our misconception, this was me, you feel like you want to take a bigger breath in. We now know that it's because of CO2, but you feel like you want to take a big breath in, because you think oxygen's low because I've been exercising. So you take this big breath in, the big breath out happens, but you're not thinking about that. You get rid of a load of CO2, and then you feel better. And so then you think that, oh, I took that big breath in, that made me feel better. Oh, it's creating that like feedback loop of, oh, it is oxygen. Whereas actually you've just not appreciated that it's carbon dioxide that you blew out after that big inhale.
And we were talking about CO2 tolerance, how to build it, why it matters.
Yeah, no, it's right. I was talking about CO2 releasing. So it's like carbon dioxide can sound like this waste gas that we have to get rid of, but actually plays some vital roles within the body. Influences everything from your blood pressure, vagus tone we talked about before, impacts the vagal nerve. The vagus nerve, and so being able to tolerate adequate levels of it within our blood, within our body, is important for oxygen delivery to your tissues, important for circulation. And so, but it is the driver for our breathing. So when you become sensitive to it, it forces you to breathe faster and breathe bigger and get rid of more of it. And then you have less of it in the body. So then your circulation is restricted.
Right.
Oxygen delivery is restricted. So we want to try and keep it in. And it's there's two principles that you can't really get away from that we teach with the Oxygen Advantage. The Oxygen Advantage, very much by Patrick McKeown, he's who taught me, is embedded and based in the science of breathing, and based on the research that's been done within breathing the last 20 odd years. And you can either slow down your breathing and breathe less and breathe lighter and breathe more gentle and keep carbon dioxide within the body by reducing your breathing, the speed and the size of them, or you can hold your breath and literally keep it in with force. And it really is as simple as that. Now, depending on where your starting point is, you won't want to do something that's sort of forceful and stressful. Holding the breath quite strongly is stressful, but we did at the beginning just some 2, 3, 4 second pauses, more like, but we were holding the breath. That allowed us to, one, slow our total breathing rate down, but two, whilst you were pausing, we weren't letting any carbon dioxide out, so we were gently letting levels rise. So there's this slow burner of what we call breathing light, breathing less, breathing lighter and quieter and smaller. And then there's forcing adaptations, and the stronger breath holding has actually been mapped to simulating altitude training. You can get your blood oxygen saturations to drop to a level that's equivalent to being at sort of 4,000 or 5,000 meters of altitude with a little bit of practice over a week or so. And then there's benefits that we get for sports performance from that, but just as a general awareness or understanding of like improving my tolerance of carbon dioxide. If you improve your tolerance of carbon dioxide, you become less sensitive to it. That allows your body to tolerate a little bit more on the inside. That helps with oxygen to be released more easily and more efficiently, and allows for better circulation within your bloodstream, allows your blood vessels to modulate your blood pressure more efficiently and effectively, and also helps with vagal tone. So it'll improve your autonomic nervous system function as well. So it is one of the, and as part of that, it will allow you to reduce your breathing rate and not feel like you need to take as bigger breaths. So that's calming on the body. If I said to you, we said something earlier about sort of the simplicity of things. And I think it's when you're talking about, if someone had told you years ago about where the greatest density of alveoli are and where blood sits, it seems so obvious. You go, okay. And so in a similar thing, how would you feel if you were able to breathe calmer? You'd feel,
if you were able to feel calmer.
If you were able to breathe calmer, you'd feel calmer. It's literally not rocket science. Anyone would understand and be able to appreciate that. And what's calmer breathing? Breathing slower, breathing a little bit less. This is one of the things that I love about breathing and breath training and teaching this stuff, because it's so impactful because it can literally, it's within that center of like all the other autonomic nervous system functions of the body. And so it will influence potentially so many different areas, but it's dead simple, but impactful. And then if you want to take it, if you want to go deeper down and find out, all the amazing things that when you look at the physiology of the body and how breathing is affecting it, you can find all the science in the world that you want to explain why we should be trying to work on our breathing. But it doesn't then make it, even though the science can seem a bit complicated to get your head around at first, but it doesn't make the outcome any more complicated. You're going to need to try and breathe more efficiently in terms of your mechanics and in terms of your chemosensitivity to allow you to actually breathe slower and breathe less. You're going to breathe calmer. You're going to then feel calmer. Your stress levels within the body come down. The body's just not working as hard to just be here and be alive. But then you also set a bedrock and a foundation. If you're interested in sport and sports performance, I work with a number of professional athletes here in the UK where if you've got a foundation of breathing that's poor, is inefficient, when you start exercising, it doesn't get better. Your dysfunction gets exposed. Whereas if we work on your foundation of day-to-day breathing, I make you more efficient at breathing when you're not exercising. You will get more efficient when you're exercising as well. Yeah, but there's also some bits to go. Okay, we need to learn and practice and being able to progress someone to being able to breathe well when they're actually getting really taxed. There's that to add on top. But for everybody, if you improve your foundation base level of breathing and be more efficient when you're not exercising, it will also help you when you're exercising. And the really important thing is exercise becomes more enjoyable because you don't feel so out of breath and you also recover faster. Yeah. No one enjoys running along panting. It feels horrendous. It looks horrendous. It looks horrendous, and it feels horrendous. And I'll say it again, you feel horrendous. So then you don't recover as fast. Your body remembers how stressful it felt when you were doing that, and so you don't feel like going and doing it again. And it might be for a lot of people, their breathing is actually restricting them from enjoying physical exercise that's going to be really beneficial for their physical and mental health. Sorry, that was a rant.
Right. It's like the white coat effect. It's like when you're going to get your blood pressure taken at the doctor's office, considering the setting and everything that's happening, your blood pressure is going to go up ever so slightly and your heart rate's going to go up. But if you're...
Well, it's almost the reverse of that.
You're measuring this. Yeah, it's the
reverse.
Because
it's calming.
The safety of your home, and you want to show yourself how, healthy you are, but there's no if there's none of this pressure, you have to prove anything, and you want to see a good number. So in my case, when I go to the doctor's office, I know how to modify my physiology, and I do everything that I can to make my numbers as the best that they can be. I immediately, before they bring out the blood pressure cuff, I'm pausing between inhale and exhale using my diaphragm. I'm sitting still, and they're like, "Oh my God, you have bradycardia." And I'm like, "No, no, I know how to relax." And so, you mentioned these quantitative ways of looking at this, and I've worked with so many clients that have terrible sleep, and one of the best ways to improve their sleep is through breathwork. And I'm not an expert like you are, but just teaching them something as simple as the box breathing to put them in a parasympathetic state. Immediately you notice their sleep latency goes down, so it takes them less time to fall asleep. Their deep sleep goes up about 15 to 20%. Their HRV goes up because now they're in a more parasympathetic state. Their nervous system can assimilate to the demands of the environment. They can really relax. Everything improves across the board. Yeah. But what would you say are some of the most practical ways to breathe, either before bed or whenever we are either, let's say, dealing or anticipating stress? Is it the box breathing? Is it the 4-7-8? Is it the pausing? Is it a combination? Is it all of the above? What are
Great question.
Some of the ways that you recommend?
Great question. This is one of my current favorite things to talk about because there's an element that people are missing, right? So undoubtedly, the box breathing for your client has been working. You've got some data to show that. Yeah. So their box breathing.
But wait, hold on. I show them use the diaphragm.
Yeah.
Like really put your hand on your belly, feel your belly, expanding, contracting. Do this through your nose, and you can maybe double the length of the exhale. So it's kind of like a combined like box 4-7-8.
Yeah.
So pausing, spending twice as long exhaling versus inhaling, just a very simple, almost too simple
No.
method would be the
It
box
should be
breathing.
simple. It shouldn't need to. It don't make something more complicated than it needs to be. So one thing I was going to say was that the extending the exhalations. Remember, I said earlier that when you extend an exhale, heart rate slows down, release neurotransmitter acetylcholine. That helps that parasympathetic state. So having longer exhalations when you're trying to down regulate can be a really good part of that. Now, whether someone's doing a 4x4x4x4 box, or whether they're doing 4-7-8, or whether they're doing an exhale, a 4 box, but the exhale is double the inhale, all of those things. What's the parameter you're setting? The parameter you're setting is the speed of the breath.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
so one thing I would say is, for a lot of people that I'm teaching, let's say the 4-7-8-2s, I tell them, pierce your lips if you're going to exhale from your mouth. And if you really pierce your lips, it'll force you to slow down that breathing, because you're not going to get, if you're like whistling, okay, that's a problem. But if you're going, really, it's, in my opinion, it's an excuse to get them to exhale a little slower.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you're saying, like, regardless of the strategy they're using, it's really about the speed of the exhale that allows you to get into that parasympathetic state.
Yes. By the parameter bit. So if you're giving someone an 8-second exhale, you're dictating the speed. Okay.
Because you're giving them 8.
Because you give them 8 seconds to do. Yeah. So none of this stuff is. Well, there's another element that it will impact.
Okay.
And so the speed is just one part of breathing. The other element is the size of each of those breaths they're taking. Okay, so I could do
right, because they take a big breath, and in those 8 seconds they have to exhale a lot quicker.
Yeah, so if I could do a 4 in, 6 out. I take a 4-second inhale. There's two. I'll show you 2 types of 4-second inhales. I can do one like this. Yeah, that was 4 seconds, and then I can do one like this.
Yeah.
And you can't even tell that I'm breathing. And so the volume of air in those two is dramatically different. And so our tidal volume, or total volume of air that we breathe, is dictated by the speed and the size of the breath. And what gets branded around a lot at the moment, which is great, like, because the speed of breathing will influence the nervous system 100%, and it's shown that. But we're missing a part of the biochemistry if we're not teaching our clients, or we're not understanding ourselves, that the volume or size of that breath is also something that I want to try and influence. And I want to try and gently reduce that. And what we're looking for in terms of accumulating a soft amount of carbon dioxide, which will help with chemosensitivity, will help with your efficiency of oxygen, will help with vagal tone, is just that subtle sensation of air hunger. Just that feeling of like, okay, I feel comfortable, I can stay relaxed, but I do feel like I'd probably, on auto, I'd probably like to take a slightly bigger breath, but you're just comfortable resisting it. So doing your box breathing, your 4-7-8, but with that added sensation of just a little tinchy bit of air hunger, will make some dramatic.
As you're exhaling?
Just throughout the whole thing. Okay. You can have the air. I mean, you'll most likely get the air hunger during that exhalation, but you'll notice it all the way through, just a soft amount. But that then means that you're actually working on your chemosensitivity. You're working on your carbon dioxide tolerance. You're changing your chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide, and importantly, one bit with breathing we haven't discussed yet, the psychological relationship you have with that sensation of air hunger. Because that's a massive thing as well. Because most of the time, psychologically, we think that air hunger is oxygen being low, which we've talked about. It's not that. But, depending on what experience you've had in life, that sensation of air hunger can make us feel a bit panicky. It can make us remind us of a drowning incident that you maybe had as a kid that you've forgotten about, or whatever it is. And it's changing just softly, just a soft little amount. But when you add that to any of the speed of breathing that we might be doing, whatever it is, that's going to be a really, important part to make long-term changes. So I said, like, you can make short-term changes. If you make someone slow down their exhales, literally you could put the heart rate monitor on them and it will happen. You get some real-time HRV data, you will change it for someone instantly. If you do, even just doing 5 in, 5 out, you will improve it. Okay, 4 in, 6 out.
Right.
But you won't be actually influencing how their body responds to CO2, because what will happen if someone's used to breathing much faster than 5 in, 5 out, right? You slow them down into 5 in, 5 out. You've slowed down the speed of their breathing. The other part of the brainstem in the pons will increase the size of each of those breaths. So they're breathing at 6 breaths per minute at 5 in, 5 out, but the brain wants to keep everything the same. And it's the total volume of air coming in and out that is dictating your CO2 sensitivity, not the speed of your breathing on its own.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And this really just brings everything around so nicely, because you have all these elements now of breath that show you what it takes to actually achieve the desired physiological state that you want to elicit. And yeah, I think I need to be more deliberate about how I describe this to people that actually want to achieve more parasympathetic activity before bed. I guess I got lucky that most of them probably weren't taking the biggest breaths, but I should definitely be more deliberate.
So as I mentioned before, if you try and get someone to take their respiratory rate, and I say, right, I want you to count your breathing, but I don't want you to like control it. I just want you to see what it's like on auto. The very fact of them just counting their breathing, they'll slow it down by a couple of breaths per minute, just because some focused attention on the present moment of your breath actually helps you to relax and slow down that breathing without even giving them any other cues. So asking someone to do any type of slower breathing is going to have a beneficial effect on that down regulation. But the point that we had that realization of there in that conversation, that the total volume of air that you're breathing, that's what will influence actually changing chemosensitivity, and that's what's going to make long-term changes to better breathing.
Wow.
That's just being missed by most people.
There's a little inside joke that I want to share with you that I think you will appreciate, and it's between my girlfriend.
I hope I get it.
Between my girlfriend. What's that?
I was always scared when someone says, "Oh, they've got a really good joke," and I'm like, now I'm worried what if I don't get it.
I think you will.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever watched The Sopranos.
I see it,
but Tony Soprano.
Well, I haven't watched The Sopranos, so I might struggle with this.
Yeah. So no, I think you'll get it either way. I promise. I'll take you through it. So Tony Soprano, who's this, he's he leads this group of mafiosos, essentially, in Jersey, and throughout the whole show, I mean, like every episode, he's the main character, so you can't miss this. He's just breathing so heavily, like you can hear it throughout the episode. He's going, and there's it's mostly nasal breathing, but you can hear.
It sounds like
really
restricted.
Hear it, Yeah, it sounds very restricted. And actually, right now, my nose is kind of stuffy, so you can probably hear it on my end too. But you can hear it through the whole episode, and it sort of adds to like the layer of stress that he's dealing with. And it's funny because my girlfriend is very in tune with her breath. She's a yoga instructor. And sometimes I'll be working on something like very hardcore, or I'll be playing like a video game and I'm just like super in it, like super in it. And she's like, "Oh my God, you sound like Tony Soprano." And she tells me this like, a few times a month. And every time she says that, I kind of laugh and I go, man, maybe I should focus in on my breathing. And so I would love to invite people tuning in to be aware of this, not just for themselves, but for the people around them, because you can really help them out so much. Odds are that in this day and age, we're not going to be stressed out because we're running away from danger. We're stressed out because we're dealing with something in that moment, and it counts to bring more oxygen, more blood flow, to our brain so that we can effectively manage the things that we're dealing with.
Yeah. And that's not,
we don't have to run away.
And that increase in oxygen is not by taking a bigger breath. I think that's there's a couple of just finishing off what we were saying there nicely, like that you put a pulse oximeter on you, when you feel that need to take a breath in, your blood oxygen saturations will be 98, 99%. It's just that the body's noticed there's some carbon dioxide it's not happy with. And when you are too sensitive to carbon dioxide, you get rid of too much of it, and that's reducing blood flow, reducing oxygen delivery. And the big point that I hope people can understand this concept, that if you practice some slower breathing, great. If you practice 4 in, 6 out, or 5 in, 5 out, great. But also have an appreciation that you can be breathing 5 in, 5 out, which is 6 breaths per minute, which is a slow breathing rate, really good for heart rate variability. But you can still be over breathing and being inefficient with your breathing in terms of the volume of air that you're taking. So be aware of the size of the breaths that you're taking. As well, we haven't talked. We've talked a bit about it, but as well as the mechanics of rib cage, lower movement, lower diaphragm, rib cage moving out laterally. Be aware of the mechanics, but be aware of the size of the breath. And being efficient would be: can you ask your body to just take slightly smaller breaths than it needs to, knowing that your blood oxygen saturation is like nearly full anyway. That is not the issue. And then you'll make some real long-term change to your breathing.
Yeah. Something else that I've done to take this a step further and build up my CO2 tolerance, and this translates both to spearfishing as it does to anything above the water, out of the water, and even in my day-to-day, just feeling better, knowing that I have a better functioning body and physiology is I will hold my breath, let's say when I'm going up and downstairs. And then something else I'll do is when I go for a walk outside, or in the morning or afternoon, let's say I'm walking by on the road, I'll like hold my breath between like telephone poles. And I find that this is just, think about it. You're walking, you're not spearfishing. There's no bull sharks around. You're in a safe environment, relatively speaking. And I've seen a huge improvement in my breath hold ability when I'm in the water, just doing this. Yeah. Like this alone is enough because it increases that CO2 tolerance. So yeah, by the time I get to the next telephone pole, I feel the urge to breathe, but I'll break it up with smaller breath holds to try and relax again.
Yeah.
And I want to make that point.
Yeah.
I just want to make that point for people because I think in freediving and spearfishing, you get to really see the impact that this has. And it's so direct because otherwise you're really putting yourself in danger. Like for example, the reason why you black out, when people experience shallow water blackout, isn't because you're in an environment of low oxygen. It's more so because you don't have the CO2 tolerance and the pH gets so high that your body goes, we need to stop what we're doing to conserve the little oxygen that we have left and just get and relax. But if you can build just that layer, you don't have to start, doing VO2 max training or getting crazy. In fact, most of the best divers that I know don't do too much exercise out of freediving. They do a bunch of yoga, very, very low intensity stuff. But because they're so aware of their breathing, because they're able to build up the CO2 tolerance, they get so much more out of that activity. And when they do go and train for something that's higher in intensity, they tend to last a lot longer in that activity as well.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that people do an exercise like this, let's say holding their breath going up the stairs, or do you think that's maybe something?
There's a whole, we should probably do a part 2 on breath holding. There's a whole host of breath holding drills and exercises we do with the Oxygen Advantage that a quick whistle stop tour of it's like holding the breath on an exhale elicits a stronger response, so you get greater adaptation. So you don't want to fill the lungs with air if you're doing it on. We don't do any breath holding in water because of the dangers of it, etc. You want to be doing that with the professionals and safety around you, etc. But
always have a buddy and a professional.
Doing breath holds whilst walking down the street. Now, depending on what your current level of breathing is like, what your current level of CO2 tolerance is like, you don't want to make it too stressful, and you can start off with just like taking 5 steps or whatever. But we build up to doing literally with sports people. And some of the professional athletes we work with, we'll be building up to doing like full-on sprint sessions where each sprint that they do will be on a breath hold after the exhalation. And there's some really great studies that have been done on this. Xavier Warnes is a French scientist that's done a number of within rugby, within basketball over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, where they see results in things like repeat sprintability, anaerobic conditioning, like increasing by a factor of 10. So there was one study in 2018 where they split them in 2 groups. One group allowed to breathe how they want. The other group had to do each rep of the training on a breath hold. They were doing 40-meter sprints every 30 seconds. And it was a 4-week trial. The group that were allowed to breathe however they wanted, they improved their repeat sprint ability by 6%, which is a small amount. You did 4 weeks of training. You'd expect them to improve a little amount, fine. The group that were holding their breath increased by 64%.
Wow.
Like 10 times more. Yeah. And the only thing they did different was hold their breath whilst they were sprinting. And essentially, they were doing anaerobic work. They were doing repeat sprints with very short rest. When you hold the breath, you reduce the amount of oxygen you already have, so you're making it like even more anaerobic, more anaerobic. You're making it more anaerobic, and all of the acidity that the lactate is creating, all the acidity that carbon dioxide is creating within the body, stays within the body because you're holding on to the breath, and the muscle tissues have to adapt. You're just forcing that environment.
Yeah, they're under a greater demand, but it is in a way an anabolic demand. You know, your muscle will grow to compensate for that kind of stress.
Yeah, well, they've shown that. So it's some of the phosphates and the proteins in the muscle tissues were apparently buffering the acidity from the lactate more efficiently, just because they had to.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah. You know, one thing that I do with all my fitness, all my training, whenever I'm weightlifting, I try to breathe through my nose as much as possible. Like, oh my God, if I need to breathe through my mouth, I'm like really nearing my limit. Yeah. Like I try to do it 95% through my nose, and that alone has translated to tremendous benefits. And I also do this with clients that are that are beginners that want to see good improvements cardiovascularly very, very quickly.
Yeah.
I'll tell them, hey, look, let's do this, these kettlebell swings, and I just want you to inhale through your nose. And it feels so odd to them, and it does feel uncomfortable. But I get those guys to level up much quicker than anybody else.
More efficient.
Yeah, sure, they're beginners, but this creates, it's more efficient. It creates a certain demand that helps them breathe easier, recover better, and then train harder the next day.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, a really nice thing that I'd suggest to people, if they're not a professional athlete and you're in charge of your training load, the intensity you work at, go through a phase where you just let your nose dictate the intensity you work at. It doesn't matter whether it's kettlebells, whether it's running, so whatever the thing is. I mean, but just as soon as you can't comfortably nasal breathe with it, just slow the pace down, or just have a breath. Just have a rest. Like let yourself get to bed nasal breathing, and in and out through the nose. Try and keep both in and out through the nose, and you'll see a dramatic improvement in your recovery times. If it feels horrendous at the first, and it's really snotty and all that, like that's exactly what it was like for me. That's a sign that your nose is a use it or lose it organ, like anything else. If you find it difficult to use, it's like alarm bells ringing. Like you need to unblock that thing and get using it.
Wow. Well, Jacko, it's been quite a pleasure to have you here and discuss all this.
No, I loved it. We could probably be here all day talking, couldn't we? To be fair.
Oh, absolutely. We should do a part 2 on just the breath hold training.
Yeah,
and
some cool stuff on that.
Build this into the fitness. I think that's definitely worthy of a whole part 2. And yeah, I'd love to have you back on as soon as possible to cover that.
Yeah, I can give you some
people at this point.
I can give you some case studies on. Well, I've done plenty of experimenting on myself first, putting some of those research papers into practice, and then some case studies we've done with some of the professional athletes we're working with here in the UK. So and the practical application of it's really quite simple. Again, that's one of the things I love about the breathing.
Yeah. Wow, I'm blown away. I've learned so much with you today. Thank you so much for taking me through the science and bringing your energy to it. I think that's what makes something like this just so. It's what gives it the appeal and what shows people that it really can change their lives just to breathe a little better.
Yeah.
So thank you for showing us how to do that.
Thanks.
It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, man.
Awesome.